Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wassalatu wassalam ala Sayyidina Muhammad, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, all praise and thanks belong to God, the Lord of the worlds. May peace, blessings, and prayers be upon all of God's prophets and messengers, including Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. This is Edward Ahmed Mitchell, the Deputy Director of the Council on American Islamic Relations, welcoming you to today's episode of CAIR on Air. Thank you so much for joining us. A special thank you to our listeners on American Muslim 360. We've got a very special program for you today. It's going to have two parts. First part, we're going to be discussing what is happening in Palestine, the horrific violence being perpetrated against the Palestinian people in Gaza and in East Jerusalem and other parts of Philistine. And we're going to hear from American Muslims for Palestine about the work they're doing to address that issue, inshallah. And then in the second part of the program, we're going to be following up about an issue that we addressed a few months ago and that's been ongoing, and that is this game 6 Days in Fallujah, which really, highlights and celebrates violence against Arabs, against Iraqis, against Muslims. You're going to hear from Veterans for Peace and CAIR leaders discussing what they're doing about this video game and how they're trying to make sure that this sort of bigotry does not infect the minds of young people who play these video games. So with that, we've got a packed show, so we're going to dive right in, inshallah. As always, if you have any questions during the program, best way is to post them in the comments on Facebook, and we'll try to address them during the program, inshallah. Let's start by bringing on our first guest, Sister Malak Shalabi from American Muslims for Palestine. Assalamu alaikum, Sister Malak. How are you?
Wa alaikum assalam, Brother Edward. I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, alhamdulillah. Thank you so much for joining us. I know AMP is keeping very busy addressing the issue in Palestine, as are we. So first, I want to just get an update on where we are right now. So, this situation has escalated so quickly, right? The occupation itself is the core issue that is causing all the violence. But even in the past few weeks, we saw further escalations upon escalations, the attacks on worshippers at Masjid al-Aqsa, the attempt to expel Muslim families from Sheikh Jarrah. Hamas fires rockets into Israel in response. Israel then starts a mass bombing campaign of Gaza, killing 9 children in the first 24 hours, and now 200 Palestinians are dead. You've also got 10 dead in Israel. So it's been escalating. Our own government, to be frank, has enabled this violence and even justified it and allowed it to continue escalating. So let me start, Malak, by asking you, give us an update on where we are right now in terms of what is happening on the ground in Philistine and Palestine, what our government is doing, or I should say is not done, to address it. And then we'll talk about what AMP has been doing and how people can help, inshallah. Where are we right now?
So right now in Palestine, I'm sure all of you, if you open social media, it's all you see. There are people posting videos of funerals happening. There's the clip that some of you might have seen of a young man who lost his fiance just a few days before they got married. He buried her a few days before they had planned to get married, and they had been engaged for 2.5 years. You see videos of young boys mourning their brothers at funerals, children mourning their fathers, trying to run after their bodies before they are buried in these mass funerals. And the reality is people are dying every single day. And it's hard to understand and internalize when we look at things like statistically, so looking at numbers or looking at reports of the dead. But if any of you have lost a loved one, you know exactly how deep that grief can be. So imagine that compounded with the understanding that this is as a result of a pure form of oppression and a pure form of attack upon a people based on their identity. It would make that just that much more painful. So the Palestinian people are suffering in every corner of Palestine. And what we're seeing now unique is that Palestinians are rising up across the country. So right now there's a general strike happening that, tens of thousands of people are participating in. And, in Jerusalem itself, you mentioned the attacks on Masjid al-Aqsa. Those were atrocious, horrific, and they really rallied a lot of people, not only in Palestine, but worldwide. Muslims in the US, Muslims across Europe, Muslims in Pakistan, India, Kashmir, every country you could imagine. And what's especially notable about right now what's happening in Palestine is how people are mobilizing. And as you know, Brother Edward, and probably, the older people listening to this podcast, know that, whenever something big happens, people usually get more riled up. But what is our role? Like, as Americans in the United States, what is our role? We don't want our money to go towards the genocide, the ethnic cleansing of another population. So what a lot of Muslim American activists have been doing is raising awareness on that issue. A lot of Americans don't even know that our taxpayer dollars goes towards funding the colony of Israel. But this is something that people have been working on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year for many, many years. And we're starting to see that come to fruition. Now, where does the United States government stand on this? We know that the United States has an unconditional allyship to date with the state of Israel. And that means the Biden administration, most political officials have some sort of affiliation, typically also funding coming from Israel lobby groups. And what does that mean? It means that they also control the narrative in the political sphere. But what organizations like American Muslims for Palestine, what we've been doing for years now, what organizations that do this kind of work on the ground have been doing, including Muslim American organizations, Palestine-centered organizations, human rights organizations, is working with our members of Congress, working with politicians, regularly briefing them on what's happening, regularly giving them opportunity to learn and support legislative action to stop the injustice from happening at the hands of our tax dollars. So to speak directly to AMP and other, CAIR even related actions that are live right now, during Eid, there was a planned celebration with the Biden administration. And what AMP, CAIR, other organizations did was plan to boycott this celebration, because you absolutely cannot be slaughtering our extended family in Palestine and expect us to come to a Zoom celebration with your administration that has refused to condemn the killing of innocent Palestinian children at the bare minimum. Like, we're not even talking about women or men, because apparently, we always have to emphasize women and children. Men does have a right to live as well in Palestine. Men have a right to life. And even that you weren't able to condemn. How can we wholeheartedly, realistically attend this? So there was a mass boycott by many Muslim American organizations to take a stand, because our intra-community solidarity is just as important as us building networks and connections outside of our community. So that's one action item that many people mobilized and worked on even throughout Eid. The second thing is, there is a letter that was introduced by Representative Marie Newman just as of 2 weeks ago. And this specifically directs the attention towards the impending home demolitions in Jerusalem. So there's a neighborhood called Sheikh Jarrah, as you mentioned, that has, it's trending now. Hashtag Save Sheikh Jarrah. Check out the hashtag. See the stories of people who are being kicked out of their homes, just like my grandpa was kicked out of his home in 1948. The story, the Nakba, continues every single day. What you can do, a realistic action item for you listening, for your family listening, for your community listening, call your representative. You can go to ampalestine.org, and there's a really easy link where you just have to send an email to them directly. All you have to do is put in your zip code. Super, super simple. I can put that in the comments later as well. All you have to do is contact them via email, via phone, and make your voice heard. You want to make sure that at least your community is represented. Make sure that your representatives sign on to this letter. And this is just one example of the legislative action that you can take now. But be sure to follow AM Palestine, American Muslims for Palestine, because again, this stuff is being pumped out year round. But thank you for your attention, and thank you for calling attention to this very, very important issue right now, Brother Edward.
No, it's critical, Malak. In so many different ways. I've noticed this in my personal conversations. I'll note it now that as an American, right, I feel a special obligation to speak up about this, because it's our tax dollars that are paying for the bombs and the bullets and the batons that are being used to harm innocent Palestinians, right? As a Muslim, obviously I care about my brothers and sisters around the world, from Palestine to China, the Uyghurs to Kashmir to India, right? As someone who cares about human rights, whether or not I was an American or a Muslim, of course I care about this gross human rights violations, apartheid happening in the 21st century, right? And so no matter which way you look at it, no matter what lens you approach it from, this is something we've got to talk about and something we've got to care about. And I think what you've noted and what we're seeing is that so many more people are talking about this issue now in a fair way, and also recognizing the humanity and the suffering of the Palestinian people. I think this is radically different than even what we were seeing in 2014, when the last time that the Israeli government unleashed such violence on Gaza. So I think, as distressing as this is, things are changing for the better. The discourse is changing for the better, and that's a lot due to the work of American Muslims for Palestine, the Palestinians on the ground uniting to speak up about what's happening. And so it's so important, as you noted, that people raise their voice, because this is not only happening on the ground in Palestine, but the real, you could say, struggle is the struggle for hearts and minds, right? To let people know what is really happening and convince people this has got to stop. And even in Congress now, people who were usually anti-Palestinian, completely indifferent to the Palestinian suffering, are now issuing statements that are kind of almost balanced, right? Never hear of from people like Jerry Nadler or even Chuck Schumer saying he just wants a ceasefire and nothing more. I mean, these are remarkable changes we're seeing. And so, this is progress, and it requires people to keep raising their voice. So, Malak, I'll give you the last word, and then we're going to transition to the second half of the program.
No, thank you so much, Brother Edward. That's exactly on point. And again, this is a year-long effort. So just we have to make sure that our efforts are invested continuously so that we can continue to see this incremental change. This is what we want. We want harm to be stopped. The burden isn't on us to prove our humanity. The burden is on the United States government to stop funding these war crimes that are outlined by the largest international human rights organizations that are very well studied and documented. The US is blocking every UN resolution to try and stop the violence in Palestine. And it's essentially the only way that we can speak out is to put our representatives in check. And this is what's happening now. People are mobilizing now. And the movement for Palestine, the way that I kind of envision it internally, I see it as a body in motion. It has different parts. There's the media aspect of it. There's the grassroots activism part of it, so all those demonstrations. There's the education aspect of it. There's the religious community organizing aspect of it. And there's also the political advocacy aspect of it. So as long as we all just, continue to work out every single one of those muscles, we'll continue to move forward with strength and eventually towards our grand goal. Thank you so much for your time.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much, Malak. A pleasure having you. We'll be in touch, inshallah. Everyone, make sure you're following AMP. They are the ones, leading this effort. We are here to support them and work with them. And so make sure you're following their work and supporting it, inshallah. With that, I want to transition now to the second half of the program. We're going to have two new hosts coming on. I'm going to step aside and get to enjoy as an audience member. Let's bring on Robert McCaw, the Government Affairs Director of CAIR National, and Hudayfa Shabazz, the Research and Advocacy Coordinator of CAIR National. Assalamu alaikum, gentlemen. How are you?
Alhamdulillah. How are you?
Good. I'm doing well, alhamdulillah. And I can almost read Robert's lips from doing this for so long, so he'll have to unmute himself. I'm going to turn over to you two to introduce the next part of the program and our guests. Thank you all so much. And by the way, you can go, please feel free to go beyond 3:30. Obviously, the first segment went a little long. And so, take as long as you need, 3:45, 4 o'clock. I'm sure everyone will enjoy the conversation. So take as long as you need and take it away. Assalamu alaikum.
All right. Wa alaikum salam, Edward. Huzaifa, salam. How are you, brother?
Alhamdulillah. How are you?
Alhamdulillah. Hey, I'm going to jump right into it. Can our producer bring in all our guests? And we have a couple good guests joining us today.
There you go.
All right. Great. So just as the flyer for today's program said, this segment of the program is on CAIR and Veterans for Peace, open petition and call on Microsoft, Sony, and Valve to not host the Arab murder simulator 6 days in Fallujah. We're going to jump into that game and get in all about what it is and what we're trying to do to stop this from progressing. But first, I just want to introduce our esteemed guests that have joined us, and I'm just going to let themselves introduce. So I'll start with Garrett.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on. It's a privilege and honor to be part of the show. My name's Garrett Reppenhagen. I served as a cavalry scout and sniper with the U.S. Army, 1st Infantry Division. I served in Kosovo and I served in Iraq for a year. During that year was the assault on Fallujah and the atrocity. I'm currently the executive director of Veterans for Peace, and I've been working for racial justice and anti-militarism ever since I got out, and even before, actually. Who you pass it to next?
Let's give it to Chris, and then we'll jump to Ross.
Hi, Chris here. I'm a United States Marine Corps veteran, having served Iraq and Afghanistan during my tours from 2004 to 2010. My tour of Iraq did take me into Fallujah a year or so after the assault on Fallujah that we're going to be discussing today. I'm a digital organizer with Veterans for Peace and helping build the community online digital space, Gamers for Peace, our Twitch channel and Discord, trying to combat militarism in gaming and provide some truth in recruitment and speak to the larger efforts of Veterans for Peace. Really excited to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm going to pass it over to Ross.
Hey everyone, I'm Ross. I was a Marine. I was in Fallujah for the second big battle, Operation Phantom Fury. I'm also the main author of the book, The Sacking of Fallujah, in People's History. Shameless plug. And I run a project called the People's History of Fallujah Digital Archive.
Garrett, Chris, Ross, thank you for joining us. Chris, I've been really enjoying watching the Twitch channel. Ross, there's no such thing as a shameless plug when you're online.
Yeah.
I'm gonna give it to Huzaifa to take it away.
Great. Well, thank you all for coming on, and we had a really great conversation last time when we were on the Twitch channel about 6 Days in Fallujah. I think for the sake of this different audience, we should try to maybe bring back some of the old conversations. So I want to just pose a question to everyone here. Anyone can answer this. Is what was the initial reaction you saw that 6 Days in Fallujah was coming back? So this is a question for anyone to take.
So for me, I missed it on the first go around before it got scrapped by Konami originally. And it came up recently coming into this Veterans for Peace space and operating in gaming. And to me, on the heels of games like Escape from Tarkov, which is very much a realistic shooter, a hyper realistic shooter, to me, it just absolutely sank of pro-militarism and a training simulator more so than a game for enjoyment or the entertainment industry. And then looking further into the details of it, as you do when something comes across your plate like this, it did not appear that it was going to realistically, no matter how much they were advertising it as such, it was going to tell a realistic story of what combat is like because of the wording that is used in how they're describing it. And it feels like propaganda to me when I see something like this. And that was my reaction. And since then, it motivated me to be here on this stream or on here with you guys, hosting you on our channel, on our Twitch 2 weeks ago, discussing it then and getting involved with the petition and everything. First time it came across my plate, and now I'm here. So that's what's going on.
Yeah, I was pretty heavily involved with working with the Fallujah Hospital the first time the game, they were trying to put it into production. So, I was watching Fallujahans react to the news of this as they're dealing with this incredible public health crisis, the highest rates of birth defects ever recorded. And to the best of our knowledge, it's completely due to the pollution that was caused by the weapons used in the battles of 2004. So children are dying in Fallujah every single day as they're trying to make a video game about the events that caused this. Obviously, people in Fallujah were incredibly insulted, outraged, just frustrated that there's still so much misunderstanding in the United States and elsewhere about what we did to them. Frustration and outrage, really.
Yeah, I think I noticed it a few months back. There's an article floating around where the creator was asked, how they can create a video game, a realistic historical video game about these events without having the perspective of the Iraqis who survived through it. And I paraphrase, but I think his answer was something like, "Nobody cares about the Iraqis," and it just hurt my heart. I think many of us who are organizing within Veterans for Peace organize from a place of moral injury, recognizing the harm that we did as service members the perpetration of violence, especially in cases like Fallujah. And, I always seen Fallujah as an atrocity that pairs with the My Lai massacre and Wounded Knee. And to make a video game about such a thing is, I think, horrific. It's like making a video game about, the torture atrocities in Abu Ghraib. It's just sickening, and it shouldn't happen. And we shouldn't be propping these sort of things up at all.
I first heard about the game kind of on the same timeline as you all. I consider myself a gamer. I found out about it on the website IGN, which I've been reading since I was like 10. And I was a little shocked because I've been playing Call of Duty. I've been playing a lot of different, war simulator games for years. There are always aspects of, anti-Arab, anti-Iranian, targeting of Pakistan or Afghanistan in these video games, in these different simulations of war events, and it always irks me. I never really play these games in good conscience. Sometimes I skip a couple and I'll come back just to see what it looks like, to see that it's gotten worse and stop again. I'm basically stuck in World War II shooters right now. But when I saw this game, it was just so on the nose of, this is an Arab murder simulator. This game is really designed and predicated off the real events and suffering of the Iraqi people. And as Ross said, they are still going through the damage that was inflicted by this most recent conflict. And, just from a CAIR perspective, we have not gotten involved in video games before. We stick really to politics, civil rights issues, traditional media, but I don't think an organization as big as CAIR can really ignore anymore the growing multi-billion-dollar industry that is video gaming. And, this is just our first foray into commenting on the issues of Islamophobia, anti-Arab stereotypes, targeting in the video game industry. I hope, inshallah, in the future we'll be working with Veterans for Peace and, getting on that cool Twitch channel you all have for Gamers for Peace. Where we tackle on the other issues of Islamophobia in the industry. So I'm really happy that I was able to work with Huzaifa and push this issue forward and bring it to the attention of the Muslim community. And we're not the only ones doing that, but it had to start somewhere and it had to start sometime.
Great.
Hey, go ahead.
So I wanted to also thank you all for sharing your thoughts. I want to kind of jump on to the folks that mentioned that they were in Fallujah. I'm really interested in learning about more in depth. Maybe Ross, you can maybe tackle this question first. The disconnect between, what is presented in the video game from what we have seen so far, and your own personal experiences about what's actually happened there on the ground. So maybe if you can maybe touch on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suspect that's the bulk of the problem. Really, just like most people don't know the basic facts of what happened in Fallujah. And there are reasons for that. I'm happy to go into it. Particularly the second operation, November 2004, was heavily propagandized. And it just created all these myths about, Fallujah, the presence of Zarqawi in Fallujah, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, a lot of stuff that was just like outright false. I suspect if you asked most of this video game supporters how they would feel about a video game about the Nazi invasion of Poland, for example, that allowed people to play from the perspective of a Nazi soldier, they would see that something is wrong with that, right? So I think if people really understood the scale of the war crimes committed during the operations in Fallujah, they would have a similar moral reaction. So really, we just got to talk about the facts. I mean, the first thing to talk about, I think, is it was claimed the main reason for the Second Battle of Fallujah, which was the larger operation of the two in 2004, the one that really just destroyed the city, a city of 300,000 people we're talking about, nearly leveled the entire city to the ground, created 300,000 refugees. It was claimed that we were liberating the city from this guy, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, allegedly the leader of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And it turns out that at the time, the US military was running a PSYOP to exaggerate the role of Abu Musab al-Zarqawi in the insurgency in order to delegitimize them, to alienate them from the popular support of Iraqi communities. And they claimed he was in Fallujah, and there is in fact zero evidence that he ever set foot there. No one has ever seen the guy. There's no real evidence he was in Fallujah. It was totally a false casus belli for the operation itself. And then there's a lot of questions about the actual conduct of the operation itself, such that it was very indiscriminate. The U.S. military did not take proper precautions to safeguard civilian life. The graphic at the beginning of the show showed one figure stating 800 civilians were killed. That's a figure coming from the Red Cross. I don't actually know the methodology they used to come up with that figure. The only group I'm aware of where I'm familiar with the methodology comes from a reconstruction group of local Fallujians who came into the city after the operation. They counted the bodies from a single neighborhood, used that as a statistical sample using, conventional statistical methods, then estimated that if there was a similar number of dead bodies in each neighborhood in Fallujah, the figure is actually closer to 4,000 to 6,000. So it was this incredibly violent operation based on a false claim. And we, in fact, did not liberate Fallujah at all. We destroyed the city, forced the population into refugee status, and, as I mentioned earlier, possibly created one of the largest public health crises in human history. There have never been levels of birth defects recorded at the level as they are in Fallujah.
Absolutely. Chris and Garrett, you're free to jump in and answer that question what was the disconnect between? Do you see a disconnect between the video game and what really happened on the ground? And your thoughts on that.
So, I didn't participate in Phantom Fury, the assault itself, just being there afterwards and seeing the conduct of what was going on in the cities. The city, it's a big city, and this game is procedurally generating. The game is creating itself according to an algorithm and an input from the game designers every time you boot it up. That is not a realistic rebuilding of the city to give historical representation or to provide an actual experience that a military, that a Marine or Army soldier would be going through. That doesn't allow for the complex stories of, we told the civilian population that military-aged males couldn't leave the city. For those that don't understand, a military-aged male is a made-up concept that includes anybody from the age of about 15 or a tall 12-year-old to 40-ish, 35-ish. So if we weren't letting military-aged males out of the city, that means a 12-year-old would the family had to choose whether they left their 15-year-old son behind or not if they were leaving. Fathers couldn't separate from their families. So a lot of families ended up staying there. And when the military rolled in, it became a shooting barrel situation where it was I hate to use a human shield argument, but that's kind of what was being proposed, was go in. Everything is, if they're military-age male, that means they're a combatant because we gave them a month to leave. We gave them 2 weeks to leave, and we told everybody to leave. If they're moving, go to town. And it escalated from there. There's white phosphorus use. There's depleted uranium shells. There is lingering effects. Excuse me, allergies are killing me today. There's lingering effects from these traumas that the game is not going to capture, because the game, according to the designers, is not going to touch on the political aspects. It's not going to include the white phosphorus other than in one documentary portion. So white phosphorus is a war crime. Like, it's an illegal weapon of war. And this game, in the reality, it was used a lot. And this game isn't going to actually address or characterize that and the devastation that it causes. It'll just be a cool footnote. And in historic games, I'm familiar with like Rainbow Six from back in the day, Raven Shield and all those. White phosphorus was commonly used grenade that you could use in these games, and it was kind of glorified. Now that's a weapon of war crimes, and it's being glossed over. The glorification of it and the usage of it is a cool thing, and it's not going to actually tell the story of what combat is like for the civilian side and the usage of all those complex details.
Chris, I'm going to jump right back into it just because you do help manage the Gamers for Peace Twitch for Veterans for Peace. Where do you see in the gaming industry Islamophobia, racism, bigotry, and how is this being used to sell video games like 6 Days in Fallujah?
So, Islamophobia in video game spaces, if we look back to like old Command and Conquer, there's things we showed a clip on when you guys were on our Twitch channel about the just blatant racism regarding the terrorist faction in there clicking on the workers. They were asking for shoes. We see it in movies to sell movies. I think that the glorification of the American military and its endeavors overseas in its as the protectorship, the nationalism that we drive is largely fear-induced as a direct response to Islamophobia. There's an enemy. We have to keep that fear pipeline going. We need to respond with force. Our military is right. And let me replay that. It just reinforces this glorification of what the American military is and does in its role around the world as a world police for colonial endeavors, for imperial endeavors, for like moneyed endeavors. And I think that it's just going to continue to reinforce as we keep nationalizing things. If we continue to glorify our military veterans, we will never see a cease to war because somebody will always want to be in that role.
Understood. And this is coming from Veterans for Peace. I'm going to bring it back to you all just to kind of recenter our campaign. We are calling on 6 Days in Fallujah, being developed by Highwire Games, published by Victura, to not be platformed on Xbox, on Sony, on Valve. Now, we have not heard any confirmation that the game will be on Sony or Xbox. I'm not sure if this is set to be released on Valve. I know right now it's being directly sold by its website, the producer of this game. But what responsibility does the video game industry have in not, selling games like this? And I'm going to ask our producer, Zai, to drop our petition alert. I was happy to see it jumped up a little over 400. We're working our way to 1,000 signatures soon, inshallah. But bring it back to everyone. Why is it so important, Garrett? Why is it so important for the video game industry not to play host?
I think that our cultures are shaped by a lot of different aspects, and our humanities drive that. And we can look at art, dance, food, celebration of holidays and traditions as some of that makeup of a lot of different cultural expressions. And that creates an identity. And in the United States and larger the Western world, Hollywood impacts a lot of that identity in the culture of Americans. And, I can remember growing up, watching cowboys and Indian movies and, World War II movies. And, I was an American. I saw myself as a good guy, and thus any enemy of ours was the bad guy. And obviously it's easy to demonize what Nazis did in World War II. But as you see that expression more in Hollywood of, Islam and Arabs being portrayed as bad guys, that infects our cultural identity as Americans, and that shapes how we grow and in our perceptions of the world and how we react with the world as we become adults. And video games more and more now have a lasting and deep impact in the cultural identities of Americans and people in the West. And if we continue to make video games that are racist and that portray this false polarization between good people and bad people, where you're able to generalize and stereotype folks, then you're going to grow up with that mindset. And, the video games like this are damaging throughout the world. And it creates racism that allows us to have American exceptionalism that excuses atrocities all over the planet. And that's going to be a continued pattern. And if we don't have responsible game makers and responsible people in Hollywood, then this is going to be a repetitive situation, and we do immense amount of harm in the world.
For all those watching, I would really recommend the two books, essays. I think they're also in video form. There's two documentaries, Real Bad Arabs, that's REEL, as in a film reel, and also the documentary Real Bad Indians. And in both those documentaries, they show how in U.S. media, especially film, for over the past 100 years, Native Americans, Indians, African Americans, more so too, they have all been negatively portrayed in U.S. media, but especially Arabs, Indians, they've been always depicted as cannon fodder for either the U.S. military, the U.S. cavalry, and today's modern media giants, the gaming industry, are just continuing this trend with games like this. We're running near our final time for the show, so I'd just like to go around and ask everyone final words, thoughts, plugs, always welcomed. Let's hear from you on what we're going to do next. I know that CAIR, working with Veterans for Peace, we're going to keep on driving this petition. We know there's a fourth quarter release of this game. We're going to really start pushing harder and harder to get more signatures. We're going to formally deliver it to these video game companies. We're going to ask for a response whether they're going to host these games. But Garrett, Ross, Josefa, Chris.
I just wanted to, the top of talking about shameless plug. So Ross, you mentioned previously about the People's History of Fallujah, the project. Okay, can you talk a little bit more about that for our audience so they can learn more about what that is exactly, how they can get involved, how they can learn about the literature, things of that sort?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's a public history project. It's a participatory project. So we want people to get involved. It's not just like, come to our website and read about the history of Fallujah. No, like we're doing oral histories. We're trying to gather documentation from the public domain, consolidate it into a repository for the public, create, resources for students to use in high school or at the college level. So we really need as much manpower as possible.
Yeah, I'm hosting a live program, but I'll watch the Zena. Where is she?
So
where is
people
she?
get involved through the
You keep on saying raw.
Fallujah History Twitter handle or peopleshistoryfallujah.org.
Great. Garrett and Christy, you want to talk a little bit more about any upcoming projects you're working on with Veterans for Peace or any sort of projects?
Go ahead, Chris.
Gamers for Peace is our online initiative, like I plugged at the start. You can check us out on Twitch, our Twitch channel. We are broadcasting almost every day. You can go to Twitch for our updated schedule. It'll take me too long to run through it because we are putting out some awesome programming. But that's twitch.tv/Veterans for Peace. You can find us there. You can also plug into our Discord. I'll link our Discord in the comments after the show or when this gets aired. But you can join us there. It's a digital community where veterans and allies, associates are coming together and operating in this space without geolocation and building a community of like-minded people to really talk about the issues. I know that as a veteran and having trouble dealing with everything that's been going on in the world over the last year. You have pandemics, you have just everything, the world. Finding a community online of like-minded veterans, Veteran for Peace, has been amazing. And it's not a place for just veterans, because it's a place for veterans that want to get plugged into the rest of the world and start lending their experience, learned experience or lived experience to these efforts that we feel we have something can contribute to or want to be able to help with because of our background. So that's the Gamers for Peace. Veterans for Peace is all encompassing, and I'm gonna let Garrett talk about the larger Veterans for Peace initiatives.
Yeah, I don't want to take too much time centering Veterans for Peace. I think that it seems radical to a lot of people that military veterans would come home and oppose militarism, but it's not that surprising to me. And I think that we're proud of the Gamers for Peace effort. It's a way that we can really address mostly military recruiting in this online space and try to prevent our youth from following in our footsteps and going overseas and committing atrocities and harm all over the world. We want to center ourselves less as veterans and try to be more of a platform to highlight the people who've really survived and lived through harm. And if we can do that, I think we'd be very content. And I think right now, what's happening in Palestine should be front and center in everybody's minds, and we should be out in the streets raising hell, demanding that our decision makers are more accountable, pulling back all the money and support that we have for Israel while they're doing such horrific things. And we should be supporting a free Palestine as much as possible. So it's hard to have anything on the mind other than what's going on there right now. And it really does hurt my heart. And I'm glad you all are strong in working on issues there, and we hope to be a really good partner for y'all.
Thank you. This is an excellent start. Hopefully, inshallah, a great and long-lasting partnership. I want to thank all our guests for coming onto our program. Huzaifa, thank you for co-hosting with me. This is CAIR on the Air. We are on the air every week, Tuesday and Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. We're always streaming on Facebook. Please click the links that we put in the chat box. Take action, share this program, get involved, get educated. Thank you, everyone. Assalamu alaikum.
I guess.